She's not your real grandma, Noah, so stop acting like she matters more than your own mother. I stopped breathing the moment I heard my daughter-in-law say those words through the half-open resort door during our family trip to Lake Tahoe. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, too quiet, like the entire world had frozen around me. Then came my grandson's small, trembling voice. Then why does Grandma Evelyn always stay when everyone else leaves? My hand tightened around the paper coffee cup I was carrying, and for one terrible second, I thought I might drop it right there onto the polished hotel floor. I had spent nearly $12,000 on this family vacation. The lakefront suites, the private dinner cruise, the ski lessons Noah begged for. Every detail had been planned 6 months earlier when Daniel told me he wanted us to reconnect as a family after my husband Walter passed away last spring. Back then, I thought this trip was about healing. Now, standing outside that door listening to my daughter-in-law erase me from my own family, I realized I had simply paid for my own humiliation. Your grandma buys people, Vanessa said sharply inside the room. That's what she does. Noah sounded confused. But she reads to me every night when you're busy. Silence followed. The kind of silence adults create when a child accidentally tells the truth too loudly. I should have walked away. I should have pretended I never heard any of it. That would have been easier. It would have been the version of myself everyone expected. Quiet Evelyn. Helpful Evelyn. The older woman who paid for holidays and smiled through disrespect because keeping the peace mattered more than dignity. But something inside me shifted in that moment. Maybe grief changes people. Maybe losing Walter made me finally notice things I had ignored for years. The signs had always been there. Vanessa carefully cutting me out of family photos. Laughing whenever Noah called me his favorite person. Correcting him every time he called my house Grandma's home. Even Daniel had changed after marrying her. My son used to call me every Sunday morning without fail. Now I was lucky if I received a rushed birthday text. Earlier that afternoon, we had taken family pictures beside the lake. Vanessa stood between Daniel and Noah while I awkwardly remained near the edge of the group like an invited guest instead of family. Then she smiled sweetly at the photographer and said, "Let's do one with immediate family only." Immediate family. I still remember how cold the mountain air suddenly felt against my skin. But Noah had reached for my hand afterward and whispered, "You're still my family, Grandma." That little boy had no idea how much those words mattered to me. Inside the room, I heard movement. Then Noah asked something that made my heart stop completely. "Mommy, if Grandma isn't real family, why are we staying in rooms she paid for?" Another long silence. I slowly stepped backward before they could open the door and see me standing there. My chest hurt, but not from sadness anymore. No, this felt different. Colder. Sharper. Like finally waking up after years of pretending not to see the truth. I returned to my suite without saying a word to anyone. The lake outside my balcony looked dark beneath the winter sky, and for the first time during that trip, I opened the leather folder Walter's attorney had handed me after the funeral. Across the front, in my husband's careful handwriting, were 7 words I had been too afraid to read until now. "Open this if Vanessa turns Noah against you." I sat alone on the balcony for almost an hour staring at Walter's handwriting while the cold Lake Tahoe wind pushed against the glass doors behind me. The leather folder rested unopened in my lap, heavier than it should have been for something containing only papers. Down below, I could hear laughter drifting up from the outdoor fire pit near the lodge restaurant. Vanessa's laugh carried the loudest, bright and polished, the kind of laugh that made strangers think she was charming. I used to think that too. Years ago, when Daniel first brought her home for Thanksgiving, I remember feeling relieved that my son had found someone so confident and put together. She arrived wearing a cream wool coat and carrying homemade pecan pie like something out of a holiday commercial. She hugged me tightly and called me Mom before dinner was even served. Back then, I mistook confidence for warmth. I mistook performance for sincerity. Looking back now, I realized Vanessa had always understood something I did not. Families are easier to control when one person quietly becomes unnecessary. Earlier that morning, before the argument with Noah, we had gone into town for breakfast at a little cafe near the lake. Snow covered the sidewalks, and Noah insisted on walking beside me because he wanted to show me the silly penguin gloves he got at the gift shop. Every few seconds he squeezed my hand just to make me laugh. I noticed Vanessa watching us through the cafe window while we waited for hot chocolate. Her expression lasted only a second before the smile returned, but I saw it clearly. Irritation, almost resentment. During breakfast, she barely looked at me. Instead, she spent most of the meal talking about private schools in California and how difficult it was raising children without enough personal space. Then she casually mentioned that Daniel had been considering selling the family house after the summer. My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. The family house was the home Walter and I bought 32 years ago outside Sacramento. The house Noah practically grew up in. The same house Walter promised would always remain in the family trust. That seems sudden, I said carefully. Vanessa shrugged while scrolling through her phone. Big homes become impractical at your age, Evelyn. Your age. Not our family. Not your home. Just your age. Daniel stayed quiet the entire time, focused on his eggs like a nervous teenager avoiding conflict at the dinner table. The silence hurt more than the words. After breakfast, everyone headed toward the ski village while I returned to the hotel, claiming I had a headache. The truth was simpler. I was exhausted from pretending not to notice the way I had slowly become invisible to my own family. When I finally opened Walter's folder that evening, several documents slid into my lap along with a smaller sealed envelope marked private. Beneath it sat copies of trust paperwork, account summaries, and a handwritten letter dated 6 months before Walter died. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the first page. Evelyn, it began. If you are reading this, then something has already gone wrong with Vanessa and Noah. I pray I am mistaken, but there are things I noticed before I got sick that you deserve to know. I stopped breathing as I continued reading. Walter had not only noticed Vanessa distancing Noah from me, he had quietly documented every incident for nearly 2 years. Walter's letter was 4 pages long, written in the same careful handwriting I had watched for over 40 years on birthday cards, grocery lists, and little notes he used to leave beside the coffee maker before work. But this letter felt different. Heavy, precise, like a man trying to protect something he already knew he would not be around to save himself. The first page described small things I barely remembered at the time. Vanessa insisting Noah call me Evelyn instead of Grandma whenever her friends visited. Complaining that I was too emotionally attached to him after I volunteered to help during preschool. Quietly discouraging overnight visits at my house after Walter's cancer diagnosis. At the time, I blamed stress, parenthood, modern boundaries. Women my age are taught to excuse disrespect as long as it arrives wrapped in polite language. But Walter had noticed patterns I ignored. Pay attention whenever Vanessa talks about inheritance around Noah, one line read. Children repeat what adults believe. My stomach tightened as I remembered something from almost a year earlier. Noah and I had been baking cinnamon cookies in my kitchen for Christmas when he suddenly asked me if old people became less important after they retired. I laughed at the time, thinking he was simply curious. Then he asked if families ever sent grandparents away when they cost too much money. I remembered how my hands froze over the mixing bowl while Noah innocently sprinkled flour across the counter. When I asked where he heard that, he simply shrugged and said, "Mommy says some people stay too long because they are lonely." That memory hit differently now. Everything did. I turned to the second page of Walter's letter. Attached beneath it were printed screenshots of financial transfers from an account I recognized immediately. The educational trust Walter established for Noah before he was born. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. Several withdrawals had been made over the previous 18 months. Luxury retailers, spa resorts, airline upgrades. Thousands of dollars missing in small amounts carefully spaced apart. My chest tightened as realization slowly settled over me. Vanessa had not just been trying to distance Noah emotionally. She had been positioning herself financially for years. There was another note attached in Walter's handwriting. Daniel knows less than you think. Vanessa handles everything. I leaned back slowly in my chair and closed my eyes. Outside the balcony window, snow continued falling softly over the lake while the resort lights reflected against the water below. Somewhere downstairs, families laughed over wine and expensive dinners. Somewhere in another suite, my son probably still believed avoiding confrontation made him a good husband instead of a weak man. Around 9 o'clock, there was a quiet knock at my door. Before I could answer, Noah peeked inside wearing flannel pajama pants and carrying the stuffed moose I bought him when he was 5. "Mommy says everybody is going downstairs for dessert," he said softly. "But I wanted to stay with you." I smiled gently and motioned for him to come sit beside me on the couch. The moment he leaned against my shoulder, I felt the familiar ache in my chest Walter used to call my soft heart. Noah looked up at me carefully. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." He hesitated for a second before whispering, "Did I do something bad today?" My throat tightened instantly. "Of course not." He stared down at the stuffed animal in his lap. "Mommy got mad because I told people I love staying with you more than hotels." There it was again. Not anger. Not jealousy. Competition. Vanessa did not just want distance between us. She wanted ownership over every piece of affection inside that little boy's heart. Noah leaned his head against me again and yawned softly. "I wish Grandpa Walter was still here," he whispered. "Everything was nicer when he was around." I wrapped my arm around him carefully while staring at the trust documents still spread across the coffee table. For the first time since Walter died, I finally understood what he had been trying to warn me about. The next morning, the resort dining room smelled like maple syrup, fresh coffee, and expensive perfume. Families filled the space with the kind of warm vacation energy that used to make me happy. Children laughed near the pancake station, while couples in matching winter sweaters took photos beside the giant stone fireplace. From the outside, our table probably looked exactly the same. A successful family enjoying breakfast during a luxury ski trip. But once you know the truth about people, even ordinary moments start feeling staged. Vanessa sat beside Daniel wearing a white cashmere sweater I recognized immediately from one of the trust account charges Walter documented in his folder. She smiled brightly as the waiter poured orange juice into crystal glasses. "Did everyone sleep well?" she asked casually. Her eyes barely landed on me before moving back to her phone. Noah sat beside me quietly eating strawberries while swinging his legs beneath the table. Every few minutes he leaned against my shoulder without thinking about it. Small unconscious gestures children make when they feel safe. Each time he did, I noticed Vanessa's smile tighten slightly around the edges. "We should book another family trip this summer," she announced while scrolling through resort brochures. "Maybe Napa Valley this time. Noah loves vineyard tours." Noah immediately looked confused. "I do." Daniel laughed awkwardly into his coffee cup. "You liked the grape juice tasting last year, buddy." Vanessa reached over and smoothed Noah's hair with forced sweetness. "You are always happiest when we travel as a real family." Real family. The words hung in the air longer than anyone acknowledged. I noticed Noah glance at me for half a second before looking back down at his plate. He heard it too. Children always do. I kept my expression calm and folded my napkin carefully into my lap. For years, I had spent so much energy trying to avoid conflict that I ignored the damage silence creates. Walter used to tell me kindness without boundaries becomes permission. At the time, I thought he was being overly protective. Now I understood exactly what he meant. Breakfast continued with Vanessa discussing private schools, vacation properties, and remodeling ideas for the Sacramento house, as if ownership had already transferred emotionally long before anything legal changed. She spoke about my home the same way people discuss outdated furniture they plan to replace eventually. The upstairs would make a perfect media room once everything is updated, she said while stirring cream into her coffee. Noah deserves a modern space growing up. My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug. That upstairs hallway still had pencil marks measuring Daniel's height from kindergarten through high school. Walter refused to paint over them even during renovations. Every Christmas morning, every birthday dinner, every piece of our family history lived inside those walls. To Vanessa, it was simply future square footage. Noah suddenly looked up from his pancakes. "Grandpa Walter said the house belongs to Grandma Evelyn." The entire table went still. Vanessa gave a small laugh that sounded too quick. "Sweetheart, adults handle complicated things. You do not need to worry about houses." But Noah continued innocently. "Grandpa said Grandma takes care of everybody because she is the heart of the family." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair and reached for his coffee again. Vanessa smiled tightly while cutting into her fruit. "Well, people say lots of sentimental things before they pass away." Something cold settled in my chest at those words. Not grief this time. Clarity. Walter had spent his final months trying to protect me while I continued making excuses for people who viewed love as leverage. Across the table, Noah quietly slid his hand into mine beneath the white linen tablecloth. Vanessa noticed immediately. Her eyes dropped toward our hands for one brief second before she forced another polished smile at the waiter walking by. In that moment, I realized something important. She was not afraid of losing money yet. She was afraid of losing influence. And for the first time in years, I stopped feeling guilty for noticing it. That afternoon, the resort hosted a private sleigh ride dinner through the snow-covered trails surrounding the lake. Vanessa spent nearly an hour getting ready, even though temperatures had already dropped below 20 degrees outside. She emerged from the suite wearing a fitted cream coat and diamond earrings that sparkled beneath the chandelier lighting in the hallway. I recognized those earrings too. Another charge from Noah's trust account. Walter had documented everything so carefully that I could now identify stolen money simply by looking at the things Vanessa wore. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. Deeply tired in the kind of way that settles into your bones after years of pretending not to notice painful truths. Noah practically bounced with excitement while climbing into the horse-drawn sleigh beside me. Snowflakes landed in his blonde hair as he wrapped himself tightly in the wool blanket I tucked around his shoulders. "This is the best trip ever," he whispered happily before leaning against my arm. Across from us, Vanessa smiled tightly while checking messages on her phone. Daniel stared out toward the lake in silence, physically present but emotionally somewhere far away as usual. Halfway through the ride, the guide pointed toward the mountain cabins glowing softly beneath strings of white lights. Families all around us took pictures while children laughed and couples held steaming cups of cider. Then Noah suddenly looked up at the guide and proudly announced, "My grandma paid for this whole trip because she loves us." The guide smiled warmly at me. "That is very generous of you, ma'am." Before I could answer, Vanessa let out a quiet laugh. "Evelyn enjoys spoiling people. It makes her feel needed." Her voice sounded light and harmless enough that nobody else would have noticed the cruelty beneath it. But I noticed. Noah noticed too. His smile faded slightly as he looked between us. "Grandma does not spoil people," he said softly. "She just helps." Vanessa adjusted her scarf with elegant irritation. "Noah, sweetheart, adults understand complicated things better than children." Then she glanced toward me and added casually, "Sometimes people give money because they are afraid of being left behind." The words landed exactly the way she intended. Controlled, polite, public enough to humiliate without appearing openly cruel. Years ago, comments like that would have shattered me for days. I would have stayed awake replaying every word while wondering how to fix the tension. But now Walter's letter sat folded inside my coat pocket like armor against every illusion I used to protect. I finally understood something painful. Vanessa depended on my silence more than my generosity. The sleigh stopped near a private lodge where dinner tables overlooked the frozen lake through giant glass windows. Candlelight reflected against the snow while a piano played softly somewhere near the fireplace. It should have felt magical. Instead, I found myself observing my family the way strangers study people from across airport terminals. Detached, careful. Noah stayed close to me the entire evening, talking excitedly about snowmobiles and asking if we could bake cinnamon cookies together again once we returned home. Each time he reached for me, Vanessa interrupted gently. "Give Grandma space, sweetheart. Do not bother her too much. Grandma probably wants quiet tonight." Finally, during dessert, Noah looked genuinely confused and asked the question that changed the entire evening. "Mommy, why do you always act weird when I love Grandma?" The piano music continued softly somewhere behind us, while every conversation at our table stopped completely. Vanessa froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Daniel stared down at his plate. And for the first time since this trip began, I watched my daughter-in-law completely lose control of her carefully polished smile. Vanessa recovered quickly after Noah's question, but not quickly enough. For one brief moment, I saw something crack beneath the polished version of herself she showed the world. Fear. Real fear. She set down her wine glass carefully and forced out a soft laugh that sounded too sharp around the edges. "Nobody is acting weird, sweetheart," she said while smoothing Noah's hair. "Mommy just thinks children should spend more time with their parents during family vacations." Noah frowned slightly. "But Grandma is family." The silence that followed felt heavier than the snowstorm outside the lodge windows. Daniel shifted in his chair again, clearly desperate for someone to change the subject, but nobody moved fast enough. Finally, Vanessa smiled toward me with practiced sweetness. Evelyn has always been very generous. Sometimes Noah gets a little confused because she likes taking over. Taking over. The word should have hurt. Instead, I found myself strangely calm. Maybe because Walter's letter had already stripped away every illusion I spent years protecting. Maybe because once you finally see manipulation clearly, it stops sounding subtle. Children usually know exactly who makes them feel safe, I said quietly before lifting my coffee cup. Vanessa's smile froze completely. Daniel immediately reached for his water glass like a nervous referee avoiding eye contact during an argument. Noah looked between all of us without fully understanding the tension gathering around the table. Dinner ended awkwardly after that. Vanessa claimed she had a migraine and wanted to return to the suite early. Daniel followed her without protest, carrying her coat while she leaned dramatically against his shoulder. Noah asked if he could stay with me a little longer to watch the snow outside the lodge windows. Vanessa hesitated before answering. Just for 30 minutes. The moment they disappeared through the lobby doors, Noah leaned closer to me in the booth seat. Mommy gets upset whenever people love you, he whispered softly. I felt my heart ache hearing something so emotionally complicated coming from an 8-year-old child. Why would you think that? I asked gently. Noah shrugged while tracing circles through condensation on his water glass. Every time I say I want to stay at your house, Mommy gets quiet after. He paused before adding carefully. One time she said Grandpa Walter spoiled you too much. The piano music near the fireplace continued softly while snow covered the dark lake outside in thick white layers. I stared at my grandson and suddenly remembered another line from Walter's letter. Vanessa resents loyalty she cannot control. At the time, the sentence sounded dramatic. Sitting there beside Noah now, it sounded painfully accurate. Back at the hotel suite later that night, I finally called the number Walter's attorney had written at the bottom of the trust documents. A man named Richard Bennett answered on the second ring despite the late hour. His voice immediately softened when I introduced myself. Mrs. Parker, he said carefully. I wondered when you might call. My stomach tightened instantly. You knew about this? There was a brief silence before he answered. Your husband became concerned several months before his passing. He asked me to quietly monitor the trust activity connected to Noah's accounts. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed while looking toward the dark balcony windows. How bad is it? Another pause. Mrs. Parker, there were attempted beneficiary modifications submitted twice last year. My entire body went cold. By who? Even though part of me already knew the answer. Richard exhaled slowly. The requests originated from someone using your daughter-in-law's household access credentials. I closed my eyes tightly. Outside, snow continued falling over Lake Tahoe in complete silence while the truth finally settled around me with terrifying clarity. Vanessa had not just been trying to erase me emotionally from Noah's life. She had been quietly preparing to erase me legally too. I barely slept after my conversation with Richard Bennett. Around 3 a.m, I sat wrapped in a blanket beside the balcony window watching snow pile quietly across the empty resort courtyard while Walter's documents remained spread across the small dining table in my suite. Every page revealed another detail I had been too trusting to notice while Walter was alive. Password reset requests. Attempts to access restricted trust records. Small withdrawals carefully disguised as educational expenses. Richard had emailed copies of everything while we spoke on the phone. The timestamps stretched back nearly 2 years. 2 years of manipulation happening quietly beneath family dinners, birthday parties, and holiday photos. The most painful part was realizing how normal Vanessa always seemed while doing it. She never raised her voice, never openly insulted me in front of others. People like Vanessa understood something dangerous about modern families. Open cruelty gets noticed. Controlled exclusion does not. The next morning, the resort hosted a private brunch before the final evening gala. Vanessa arrived wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather and acted unusually cheerful, the kind of forced brightness people use when they are nervous underneath. Daniel looked exhausted. He barely touched his food, while Vanessa chatted endlessly about ski resorts in Aspen and possible summer travel plans. Noah sat beside me quietly coloring on the paper kids menu while occasionally leaning his shoulder against mine. At one point, he held up a drawing of our family standing beside a cabin. I noticed something immediately. He had drawn me holding his hand, while Vanessa stood farther away near the edge of the picture. Children always tell the truth in ways adults try to ignore. That is beautiful, sweetheart, I said gently. Vanessa glanced at the drawing and gave a thin smile. You forgot mommy beside you. Noah frowned slightly. I did not forget. The table went quiet again. Vanessa slowly folded her napkin onto her lap before speaking in a calm voice that sounded rehearsed. Noah has become very emotionally dependent on you lately, Evelyn. Daniel and I have actually been discussing healthier boundaries moving forward. There it was. Not gratitude for years of helping raise her child. Not appreciation for financial support. Boundaries. Modern words wrapped around old selfishness. I stirred cream into my coffee carefully. Children usually become attached to people who consistently show up for them. Daniel finally looked up from his plate. Mom, but his voice faded almost immediately under Vanessa's sharp glance. Noah lowered his crayon slowly while looking between us. Am I not supposed to love Grandma? The hurt in his voice cut deeper than anything Vanessa had said all weekend. Vanessa immediately softened her tone. Of course you love Grandma. Mommy just thinks sometimes Grandma makes things confusing. Confusing. Another carefully chosen word. I finally understood that Vanessa never directly attacked me because direct attacks can be defended against. Instead, she planted emotional uncertainty little by little until affection itself started feeling inappropriate. After brunch, Daniel asked if we could speak privately outside near the lodge entrance. Snow crunched beneath our boots while tourists carried shopping bags through the village around us. My son shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets and avoided eye contact exactly the way he used to as a teenager whenever he hid something. Vanessa feels like things have gotten tense, he said quietly. I almost laughed at how absurdly small those words sounded compared to the reality sitting inside Walter's folder upstairs. Do you know she attempted to access Noah's trust fund? I asked calmly. Daniel froze instantly. For the first time all weekend, genuine shock crossed his face. What are you talking about? I studied him carefully then and realized Richard Bennett had been right. Daniel truly did not know everything. He looked confused, frightened even. But before I could answer, Vanessa appeared in the lodge doorway watching us from across the snow-covered walkway. Her expression remained perfectly composed, but her eyes locked onto me with something far colder than irritation now. She was beginning to realize I knew the truth. Vanessa spent the rest of the afternoon pretending everything was normal, but once you know someone is hiding fear, you start noticing it everywhere. The overly cheerful tone, the constant checking of her phone, the way her eyes followed me whenever she thought I was not paying attention. By evening, the resort ballroom had transformed for the final gala dinner. White lights hung from the wooden beams above the dance floor, while large windows overlooked the frozen lake glowing silver beneath the moonlight. Guests arrived dressed in formal winter clothes, laughing over champagne, while a jazz trio played softly near the fireplace. Vanessa entered wearing a dark green evening dress and those same diamond earrings purchased with money stolen from Noah's trust. She looked elegant, composed, untouchable. People like Vanessa survive because they understand appearances better than honesty. Noah ran toward me the moment he saw me near the ballroom entrance. Grandma, look, he said excitedly while straightening the little navy tie I bought him earlier that day in the village shop. Mommy says I look handsome. I smiled gently while fixing the collar beneath his chin. You always look handsome, sweetheart. Across the room, Vanessa watched us with carefully controlled tension while Daniel stood beside her speaking quietly with another couple. I noticed something different about my son tonight. He looked distracted, unsettled. Earlier, after I mentioned the trust fund access attempts, he barely spoke during the shuttle ride back from the ski village. Several times I caught him staring at Vanessa with confusion instead of automatic agreement. For years, I blamed Daniel for weakness. But standing there watching him now, I realized something painful. Manipulative people do not only isolate victims. They isolate anyone who might challenge their control. During dinner, Vanessa suddenly raised her wine glass with a bright smile. I just want to say how grateful we all are to Evelyn for organizing such a beautiful family vacation. Several guests nearby smiled politely toward me. Vanessa continued before I could respond. It is wonderful seeing grandparents stay involved while they still can. There it was again. Another perfectly polished insult disguised as kindness. A year ago, comments like that would have ruined my entire evening. Tonight, I simply took a slow sip of water while watching her carefully. Noah frowned immediately. Grandma is not old, he said defensively. A few people laughed softly at the child's sincerity, but Vanessa's smile tightened almost invisibly. Of course not, sweetheart, she replied. But eventually people need to step back and let parents raise their own children. The table fell quiet. Daniel looked uncomfortable again while adjusting his napkin repeatedly. I realized then that Vanessa truly believed. She still controlled the story. She thought years of emotional manipulation had made me too afraid to speak, too desperate to keep my place inside the family at any cost. She did not know Walter had already prepared me for this moment. Dessert arrived shortly afterward, but before anyone could begin eating, my phone vibrated softly beside my plate. Richard Bennett. Right on time. I answered calmly and placed the call on speaker. Good evening, Mrs. Parker, Richard said professionally. I wanted to confirm that all emergency protections connected to Noah Parker's educational trust have officially been activated. Every sound at the table stopped instantly. Vanessa's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Daniel slowly turned toward me. What protections? He asked quietly. Richard continued in the same calm tone. Due to multiple unauthorized access attempts over the last 18 months, all beneficiary modifications and account privileges connected to Mrs. Vanessa Parker have now been permanently suspended pending formal investigation. Vanessa's face lost color so quickly it almost startled me. Around us, the soft jazz music continued while nearby guests kept laughing, completely unaware that my family was quietly collapsing at table 12 beside the ballroom windows. For the first time all weekend, Vanessa looked at me without pretending to smile. And for the first time in years, I did not look away. The silence after Richard Bennett finished speaking felt almost unreal beneath the soft jazz music and candlelight filling the ballroom. Vanessa stared at my phone like it had personally betrayed her. Across the table, Daniel looked completely stunned. Unauthorized access attempts, he repeated slowly. Vanessa, what is he talking about? For the first time since I met her 15 years ago, my daughter-in-law did not immediately have an answer prepared. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then forced out a nervous laugh that sounded painfully artificial. This is obviously some kind of misunderstanding. Richard's voice remained calm through the speaker. Mrs. Parker, the activity records were verified by both the trust administrators and the bank's fraud department. Daniel turned toward his wife fully now. You tried accessing Noah's trust fund? Vanessa finally snapped slightly beneath the pressure. I was managing our finances, Daniel. Somebody had to. Several nearby guests glanced briefly toward our table before politely looking away again. Wealthy people are experts at pretending not to notice uncomfortable moments in public. Noah sat frozen beside me, clutching his folded dinner napkin tightly in his small hands. I placed my hand gently over his shoulder before speaking calmly for the first time all evening. Walter documented everything before he passed away. Vanessa's face changed instantly at my husband's name. Not sadness. Calculation. Walter misunderstood me, she said quickly. He was sick and confused toward the end. Something cold settled inside me hearing those words. Walter spent his final months quietly protecting this family while battling cancer with more dignity than most people manage during ordinary life. Even now, Vanessa still tried reducing him to an inconvenience, standing between her and control. Daniel looked physically ill. You told me the trust paperwork was routine. Vanessa turned sharply toward him. Because it was supposed to be routine. There it was. Not regret. Not guilt. Frustration that her plan failed. Noah looked up at his mother with visible confusion. Did you do something bad? The question sounded so innocent that it hurt to hear. Vanessa immediately softened her expression and reached toward him. Sweetheart, Mommy was only trying to help the family. But Noah quietly pulled back toward me instead. That tiny movement changed everything. I saw it happen in Vanessa's eyes the moment she realized she was losing the one thing she truly cared about. Influence over Noah. Not money. Not the house. Control. Richard cleared his throat gently through the phone speaker. Mrs. Parker, as requested, all future trust distributions will now require dual authorization directly through you. Thank you, Richard, I said calmly. I appreciate your help. After ending the call, the table remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, Daniel leaned back heavily in his chair while rubbing both hands over his face. He suddenly looked older than 43. Exhausted. Defeated. How long? He asked quietly without looking at Vanessa. She stared down at the untouched dessert plate in front of her. It was not like that. How long? He repeated more firmly this time. Vanessa's polished composure cracked completely then. You have no idea what it feels like living in her shadow all the time, she said while looking directly at me now. Your father worshipped her. Noah worships her. Even you still run to her every time something goes wrong. I listened quietly while snow continued falling outside the ballroom windows. For years I believed silence kept families together. But silence had only protected the wrong person. Daniel stared at his wife like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Noah slowly slid his small hand into mine beneath the table again. This time, nobody tried stopping him. The next morning, I packed my suitcase quietly before sunrise while the resort remained still and dark around us. As I zipped my coat near the hotel entrance, Noah suddenly came running across the lobby in mismatched snow boots and pajamas. He wrapped both arms tightly around my waist before whispering something I knew I would remember for the rest of my life. Real family is who stays. I held him close while fighting tears for the first time all weekend. Then I kissed the top of his head gently, stepped into the waiting car outside, and drove away from Lake Tahoe, finally understanding that losing the illusion of a family can sometimes be the beginning of finding your peace again.